Dear Diary, today I take the next step in being an ADHD life coach at Indigo Hub. I can't believe it's happening. I want to build, create, and discover a place for us to truly be ourselves. I think this journey will be the Indigo Diaries.
Dear Diary, welcome to the Indigo Diaries, and welcome to Series 3, The World Through Our Eyes, with your host, me, Natasha Hickling. The Indigo Diaries is a podcast for those who want to learn about ADHD through others and our own experiences. And this week, yet again, really excited to have another expert speak really about a topic, well, personally, that I have struggled with myself, and I know so many of my clients do all the time. So today we're dipping in to start the conversation, where we start a conversation on a topic and we just see where it goes. These are my favourite episodes because there's just absolutely no limits. So Sarah Bickers, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, Natasha.
So Sarah Bickers is a coach, and all of her details of bio is below. So Sarah, just kind of tell us a bit about kind of what your link is kind of to the neurodivergent world.
Oh gosh, well, I guess it started a few years ago when my sister, first of all, one of her daughters was diagnosed as an adult, and my sister felt really bad that she'd missed that. And so she got the other child assessed, and she turned out also to have ADD, inattentive type. And as a result of that, it was kind of on my agenda. And one of my sons, we got him assessed when he was about 15, really just to rule it out, because my sister had had this experience. And at the first of, I think it was about 3 appointments, the woman assessing him said, "This is what neurotypical would look like, and this is your son is like, he's very likely to have ADHD," which was a real shock to the system, really. So that's when I started finding out about it. And what struck me during his assessment process was how familiar so many of the things we were talking about were. So he was very articulate, and what he was describing was how I felt inside. And I was like, well, that's weird. Because the interesting thing was, by then I think a few months previously set up my business as a professional organiser. So there I was working as a professional organiser, recognising that I had a lot of ADHD traits. And then fast forward a few years, another son diagnosed with ADHD. And finally, I was diagnosed, I think it's a couple of years ago now. And that, what really triggered me going for assessment was hitting the menopause, and all the coping strategies I'd developed all through my life suddenly weren't enough. And I thought, right, now it's time for me to get this assessment and find out if this really is a thing for me. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's so fascinating, because I work with a lot of parents of kids, and they always they just sit there and they're talking about the child, and then it's like a light, like, wait a minute, that's actually me as well.
It happens so often, doesn't it? Yeah.
So I'm curious, because obviously, like, professional organizer and then ADHD. Like, for me, as soon as you said I was a professional organizer and then I was diagnosed with ADHD, they're two things that I wouldn't have thought would cross paths. Like, what made you go into professional organizing?
Yeah, I think it was the whole coping strategies thing, really, which, obviously I spent a whole lifetime. I wasn't diagnosed until I was 52. So I'd spent all my life with an ADHD brain without realizing it was an ADHD brain, a lot of working memory problems. So I'd kind of developed a lot of systems to manage my working memory challenges without constantly losing everything all the time. And those coping mechanisms were really about having really clear places for everything and everything in its place, which is, every organizer will tell you that's like a place for everything and everything in its place. And it feels like for somebody with ADHD, it's like, well, why, how is that going to happen? And for me, it had to happen in order for me to keep finding things. So it was kind of my way of managing that. And it was a little bit rigid, I think, now looking back. I think it was quite uncompromising, and it woe-betide anyone who moved anything from the right place, because then it's like it's gone forever as far as I'm concerned. my husband used to do this thing years ago where he doesn't like visual clutter on the surfaces. So I'd leave a pile of papers out that I was working on, and he'd put them away in the drawer. And I'd completely forget they'd even been there. So it wasn't even like I was going looking for them. And I said to him in the end, I said, it's like they stop existing.
Yeah.
They're no longer there. They're nowhere.
Yeah.
And so he's learned now, if there's a pile of stuff and it's bugging him, he puts it on my desk. That's the rules in our house. Because, you know, it's like we are who we are, right? If we don't like visual clutter, we don't like visual clutter.
Yeah. And if we need the visual clutter for the reminder of the working memory, we need it. But and I just think it was really quite, like you said, it's a coping mechanism, and it almost makes you go the opposite way. Like, I'm so naturally disorganized, so I need to try everything I can to be organized. And then you made a job from that.
And what was interesting is when I first became a professional organizer, I felt like a massive fraud, you know, imposter syndrome, because for years I'd sort of said to myself, well, you know, I'm really organized, but on the other hand, I do drop balls from time to time. So I kind of discounted myself a lot. And when I became an organizer, I met other organizers. I have a friend and colleague who I always say she came from her mother's womb organized. She's just super, super, super organized in everything and perfectly organized. I actually think that's quite rare in the professional organizer community now. Wow. Because I've started training other organizers. So I've trained, I think it's nearly 100 people now, nearly 100 professional organizers. And every time I run that training course and teach them about ADHD, at least one person on that course ends up coming out, and, you know, and then they'll come up to me about 6 months later and say, thank you so much. I realized that was me, and I've got diagnosed and I've started treatment. And it wasn't what I expected at all. I thought I was like rare, but it turns out that quite a lot of professional organizers are following the same sort of route as me. They're using their coping strategies, and and it does mean that you're really empathetic with those clients. You know, you really get them right from the beginning. So, and I think within the ADHD community, there's often a lot of shame involved around our homes and how we keep them. And, you know, I grew up in a really messy home. I'm pretty certain my mum had ADHD, and she was great at managing events. That's where her organizing gene came in. She would organize an event because that's exciting, right? You only do things once when you're planning an event, and then you walk away at the end of it, it's over. There's not the sort of boring, mundane stuff. The boring, mundane stuff was the cleaning and tidying, and that didn't really happen very much. So as a result, I'm very used to living in quite a messy environment. It doesn't bother me at all when I go into clients' houses. I feel quite at home in a way. And I think that's helpful in terms of being able to essentially, I suppose, declutter the shame as the first starting point, really. It's like, it's just stuff. It's just, you know, stuff in the wrong place.
But it's more than, like, when I think of the word decluttering, it's more than just decluttering stuff. It's decluttering the shame, the thoughts around it. And like you said there, it's just so much shame, because it's like, we should be able to do this stuff like washing, or mine's the washing up. Like, it's almost like, like I need to feel shame around it. I need to make excuses around it. I need to add much pressure on myself. But what you've done there, you've used something that might have not been natural, but you've learned how to manage your way of doing it, and then you're helping people to do that for themselves. What do you find when it comes to like decluttering and ADHD? Like, what are the pitfalls do you find that?
Do you mean the kind of things that stop people from decluttering? Oh gosh, I think a lot of clients, it's just time. So it's because it's not a priority, right? If they're hyper focusing on their work, then their home is not a priority, and so they don't have the time to do it. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, we do have multiple interests, don't we? We have a few things we get into. We get excited by shiny things, tasks, hobbies. So then we can end up accumulating quite a lot of stuff. And this goes for jobs as well. It goes for work and tasks as well. I think we do tend to put our hands up a little bit quickly because it's new and it's shiny and
Yeah,
it
exciting.
sounds like fun and I can do that, so then we leap into it. And then walking away from that feels like another failure.
Yeah.
So it's like almost keeping the stuff for the hobby that never really took off. You feel like if I let go of that, then I'm admitting I failed again. I mean, I would argue you're letting go of that to make space for something else, because that's the way it works with clutter. You either keep the clutter or you gain the space. It's an either or thing. So yeah, I think the hobbies thing, or the different interests, that's one factor. I think sometimes letting go of things feels difficult because I think that justice thing comes up, doesn't it? The kind of justice warrior thing. We're quite often quite environmentally aware because it's a thing that we feel passionately about. So then letting go of stuff, you can't just put it in the bin because that feels really wrong. So then we have to find the right way out, and that can be really complicated, to find the right route. And actually, that's one of the challenges I love with clients, is finding creative ways out for some of the things that they own. I remember years ago helping my dad and mum downsize, and we found an enormous pile of woodworking magazines, and they were ancient, they were really old, and probably left to me, if I was decluttering my own house, I would have just put them in the recycling. But my dad found that kind of thing really difficult, and we found a local school that had an old-fashioned woodworking department, and the teacher loved it. My dad got to take the magazines there and look around the department and chat, and was a really lovely experience. So when you hit one of those spots, that's great. So yeah, that can be another challenge. I think also tied in with that kind of passion thing is that we're often really attached to stuff. It has a lot of meaning for us, and again, sometimes it can be difficult to let go of a kind of meaning that you've held on to. So say, for example, you had an ex-boyfriend, your first boyfriend, maybe you kept a love letter that they sent you, and even though you've been very happily married for years, you still kind of keep that because you think, oh, I ought to keep that because that's a sentimental love letter that I love. Now, if you said to me, I really love that letter and it's really precious to me and it means a lot to me because it was my first relationship, that's one thing. But quite often people keep things just because they've always kept things. So in other words, they have a rule for that sentimental stuff, and then they stick with that rule. It's like, it's sentimental, therefore I'm never going to revisit whether I'm going to keep it or not. And I always challenge people to go back and have a look at the sentimental stuff, because quite often you look at it and you think, oh my goodness, why did I keep that? That it's actually the sentiment has worn off. But because we've buried it somewhere, we don't even recognize that. So
I suppose it comes back to that self-awareness, doesn't it? Like it's become a habit, right? Of this is what we do, we're going to keep this. Oh, we might need that one day, but actually it's just that you're not actually going to need that one day, and it's just about having that awareness and about challenging those beliefs to is it really right for you now?
Exactly. Is it kind of serving a purpose in the life that you're living now? And people have different reasons for holding on to things. My husband, who's not at all sentimental, he hasn't got a sentimental bone in his body, he'll keep weird electrical components just in case he might need them one day. Whereas I would just throw them out because I think, well, they're not valuable. You can always buy some again, can't you? If you really do need them, and you probably won't. So it's like one of the golden rules as a professional organizer is that you only ever do decluttering work with the person who owns that stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, because everyone's got a different value, a different way of living, a different habits, everything.
Absolutely. And so my husband now has learned that he absolutely can't make decisions about any of my stuff. I don't make decisions about any of his stuff either, because we've got such different rules. It's like, how could he possibly know? And I always find it shocking if I'm with friends and they're like, oh, I just threw it out. I just threw that stuff out because, he's never going to use it, and I'm like, what? This is shocking to me.
Because it's like it makes me think like you wouldn't go on to like your partner's work emails or husband's work emails and start deleting them and go, oh, they don't need that, or go into his job and start, oh, sorry, I don't need you today. You wouldn't. So why would you do it with their store?
And that goes even for children. It's like, occasionally a parent will say to me, oh, I know they don't care about that stuff, and you can tell they know their child really well and they know that they won't be bothered by stuff. But I always encourage parents to involve their children from a really young age in making decisions about their belongings. I've worked with kids who've been 2 or 3 years old, and you say to them, put the teddies that if you've got any teddies that you don't want, put them in that pile, and the ones you want to keep, put them in this pile, and they will just do it. It's amazing. And actually often the problem comes more that the parent is like, oh, you can't let go of that teddy because so and so gave it to you. And actually, if the child doesn't want it anymore and the parent does want it, then it then belongs to the parent, I would say, and it's up to them whether they choose to declutter it or not further down the line. But the rule is not to declutter other people's stuff and to involve other people as much as possible. And because I'm sorry.
No, you go.
I was just going to say, because I'm often working with parents of neurodiverse children, I think it's really important for them to start those skills at a young age to differentiate between what they want and what they don't want. And I believe that decision making is kind of a life skill that's, the more you practice it, the easier it gets. So that's why I encourage them to really get the children involved as early as possible, before a birthday, before Christmas. Let's make some space so that at Christmas you've got some space for new toys, and most children will very happily do that.
And it's that, I also think it's teaching that thing around your own beliefs and empowering your own, because like we know with clients that we work with, you get a lot of people that are like, oh, I should be waking up at 7 a.m. and it's like, you should be. Is this your belief or somebody else's belief because your parents have said you need to wake up at 7 a.m. And I suppose it's the same with stuff that I need to keep this, but okay, why do you need to, what's making you keep this? Well, it's actually no, because my mum wants that toy. So it's almost empowering that independence and that making your own voice and what you want valuable in that early age, and in that empowering and doing that with decluttering.
Absolutely. No, I think it's so important. And I think the key thing is that clutter, all the research that we have on clutter shows that clutter is a subjective thing. It's like one person's clutter is another person's way of expressing themselves. So you don't get to say, oh, your desk is looking really cluttered. You can talk about your own desk and say your own desk is cluttered. If my desk quite often has quite a few things on it, and that works for me, and I'm not going to let anyone shame me about it. And at the point where it stops working for me is the point that I'll sort it out. And so I think it's really important that we kind of accept who each other are, and that can be challenging, obviously, in a household where there's people with very, very different values. I came across this a while back with a couple who were just separating, actually. Literally, I think a couple of days before I came, they decided they were going to separate, and they had opposite values, which is quite common. So one of them really disliked visual clutter, so would just shove things away in drawers, but literally to an extreme, so that they didn't care at all which drawer it went in. So they didn't have a drawer for trousers or socks or pants. Everything would go in together in any old way. The other one didn't mind things being left out because they had ADHD, and so they needed the kind of visual reminders. But if they were going to put something away, they would put it away perfectly. So inside the cupboards, it was a real experience going to the home, because when we opened the cupboard doors, things were rainbow ties. I don't know if you know that phrase. So things were perfectly organized. It was like looking in a professional organizer's cupboards. Well, not mine, because mine aren't like this, but my super organized organizer friends, I bet her cupboards look like this, but lots of mess on the top. So it was like this home of two halves. There was like the very conflicting stuff going on. And when we talked about it at the beginning, the husband said to me, "Oh, I kind of wish we'd talked about this a few months ago," because he'd not really understood what was going on, you know, in terms of each of their different needs for organising or clutter. So, you know, it's so interesting.
It's so
but
interesting.
A little bit heartbreaking.
Yeah, because it goes so much deeper. Like everything you're saying, it's kind of like, oh, well, it links to this and it links to values and it links to how, like, visual. It's like almost like that was a visual representation of what was going on in their relationship.
Exactly. You know, a friend and I, a colleague and I, we always say it's never about the stuff. It never is. There's always something on the outside that's going on, that, or rather on the inside that's going on, that means that what you see what's on the outside. So, you know, there are organisers out there who will just go and do a little tidy up of somebody's house, but actually, unless you deal with what's going on in terms of maintenance, it will just go back to how it was, you know, in an instant. And then they'll feel like they'll look back and they'll think, well, that was a waste of money. I paid somebody to come and organise my home and it only lasted 6 months. Whereas the work that I'm doing with clients is much more about, right, what are your systems? You know, how are you managing your laundry? You know, I'm not so interested in how perfect it all looks. I'm interested in how what their processes are.
Yeah. And that
laundry.
Yeah. Oh, that, yeah, we'll go into that. But like you said, it's a process, right? It's not this professional organizer, it's not just this one day fix. And a lot of people think that when they come into or coaching, that it's just one fit are going to fix it and then it's all going to go back. But it has to be maintaining in systems and processes. Laundry, you've said laundry.
It's a big one. I think people with ADHD either manage their laundry really well, which I do. I've always quite liked laundry. I don't know why. Or it's a real challenge for them. And I think that's because there's lots of different steps involved, and you've got to remember, well, first of all, when are you going to put the laundry on? What's the trigger? You know, I always ask my clients, what's the trigger for putting on the laundry? And then you've got to remember to take it out. And if you don't take it out, you have to put it on again. That's not uncommon, is it? And then you've got to have a good system for hanging things out that works well. And quite often people don't have that system, so it's really annoying. So then they don't do it. They resist doing it because it feels too difficult. And, you know, honestly, it's something that I always ask every client about now, because I've just learned laundry and meal planning. Those are the two big organizational challenges, I think, in a household, really big ones.
Because not only do we need them, but there's just so many steps. And that's why, like people say, just do the washing, right? But then, like, for me, I think, okay, I've got to like get it from upstairs. I've got to put it in. I've got to remember to take it out. Then am I going to dry it or am I going to put it outside? Because sometimes I like, that drier feeling. And then I've actually got to fold it and then put it away and then wear it all and then do it all again.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the other thing, I think, is that idea that it's not a thing that you can ever complete, is it really, laundry? So that for some people, that's really frustrating, because like you're back on the laundry cycle again, going all over again. But, even for me, who I would say I'm quite good at laundry, it's the putting away bit that I hate doing the most. So yeah, I think there are challenges. I had a lovely session with a client where she was waiting until she literally ran out of clothes before she put the laundry on. And when we talked through all her processes, she'd leave it so long she couldn't remember how the washing machine worked, so she had to look it up online. So when we talked about it, the solution that we came up with together was that she would have 2 laundry bins, one for coloured stuff and one for white stuff. And the laundry bins, this was the key thing, the laundry bins she chose had to be the same size as a load that would fit in the washing machine.
Ah, nice, yeah.
And then she could just, as soon as it was full up, that was the trigger to put it in. She'd do the wash. It would only be one wash, so she could manage that. And it wasn't overwhelming, and that changed everything for her. So sometimes it can be something really simple, but it has to fit your brain, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's the thing here, like it's that thing of making it not shameful, but also ways that fit you. Like for me, the worst bit about washing is the taking out. Like I'm quite good at like regulating to put it on. I'm quite organized, you know, I'm autistic as well, so I'm very organized. I like to put things on, but it's the remembering to take it out, and then the mundane of like, oh, hanging it up and all that. But my partner likes that. He hates it when I hang stuff up, because my hand-eye coordination is awful, so I just like fling it on. But he's quite neat and likes things done a certain way. So the washing, putting the washing in, you can just shove it out. So I do that, and then he carries the second half, and that works
perfect.
Yeah, because it works for both of our brains. And one of my clients, I love this, her partner used to put the laundry basket outside the door, so she'd get up in the morning and it's there. She'd put it in, and then he'd take the second part, because that's what worked for them. And it is about trying to find those solutions for that.
Yeah, and what I'm noticing is like a massive amount of collaboration, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I'm doing with my clients, is we're collaborating together to kind of problem solve, but we're not doing it from a position of shame or emotion. We've taken all of that out of the equation. It's like it's nothing to do with what your identity is or how valuable you are as a human being. It's just laundry, you know. Let's just get this stuff done, and let's find a way that makes it as easy as possible. Once you take the shame out of the equation, it becomes possible, I think, for our brains to start thinking and coming. We're really good at problem solving, aren't we? So once we've given ourselves permission to let go of the emotion around it.
Yeah, I like what you said earlier about it's a creative process versus this, you know, like if you don't do the laundry today, it's okay. It doesn't mean you're a bad person or you're lazy or you're not ever going to do it again. But we put, like, goes back to like what you were saying earlier, we put so much pressure on ourselves to do all these things and to find coping mechanisms, because they might not naturally become easier, that almost goes to the church thing when we hold ourselves like almost like accountable to the laundry. And like you said, it's just stuff, it's just laundry, it's not us.
It's not that big a deal, is it?
No.
Yeah, there've been a couple of books out recently. Which I won't remember the names of. I think one of them's called Dirty Laundry. I do remember that one, and the other one is by Casey somebody. Have you come across that? It's something like How to Keep House Without Drowning, I think it's called.
Oh yes, I have seen that one, but I don't know who it's by.
Yeah, both of those, I would say, if this is a challenge for anyone who's listening to this, they're both worth reading, because they do take away the shame and all of that sort of emotion away from this, and just bring it down to size, bring it down to what it is. It's just laundry. It's not a moral issue. Casey Davis, that's it. Casey Davis.
Okay, I'll put all the links below if anyone's interested. So we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back and we're going to go into a bit more about the shame, because I think that bit is quite interesting around the clutter with the shame. Thanks, Sarah. And
you're welcome.
We're out.
If you would like any more information on Indigo Hub or our Indigo support group, then please check out our website below, or our link to our social media platforms, or email at indigohub.adhd@gmail.com. If you would like to offer any comments, feedback, get support, or if you're interested in the world hearing your story, then please reach out through any of our avenues. As said before, have a positive week. Check in again later. And we're out.
And we're back. And as always, every person I have on here, we always start talking during the break, and it's like, oh no, let's record. But I think it's really interesting. We were talking to Sarah. If you've not, please rewind now. Really fascinating and very deep stuff, which is not what I expected. And this thing around shame with kind of neurodivergence, or just anybody, but also with specifically with like neurodivergence and ADHD and clutter. Like, what do you find is, why are people ashamed?
I think it's that thing of feeling like you ought to be on top of this stuff and everyone else around them is on top of this stuff. And sometimes people will have other people comment about their clutter or their disorganization. You know, I always say people with ADHD have experienced a lot more than their fair share of eye rolling.
Yeah.
Throughout their life. So, you know, we've kind of, and sometimes we've internalized some of that shame. Some of it comes from other people directly, the people we live with or work with, who comment on how messy your desk is or whatever. And if we're not kind of, if we don't understand that it's the way our brains work, then it's easy for us to kind of blame ourselves and beat ourselves up about it. And then it takes you back into that dark place where you can't find a way of pulling yourself out. And, you know, as I was telling you during the break, you know, for clients, that's a real challenge, even asking for help, even, you know, ringing up for the first time. You know, a client said to me, she said, I've booked people before, but I've never carried it through because always I lost my nerve in the end and thought, oh, I can't let somebody into my house. And she described that feeling of taking me up the stairs the first time and how difficult it was. You know, even though we'd spent some time talking, it's still difficult. Like opening up your home is a vulnerable thing to do, isn't it? So you need to feel really safe with the person you're doing it with. And, you know, I if people are looking for a professional organizer, I would say find one who really listens and find one who you feel safe with. And if you don't feel safe, don't book them, you know, because having somebody who you feel like instinctively that you can trust them and you can let them in and just start to kind of work through some of that stuff is so important.
Yeah, because like you said, the home's important, but what was coming up for me as you were saying that is this kind of this expectation of like society over the keeping your house together and like mine's washing up, like washing up or this or that are very, I'm doing in air quotes, simple tasks. So because they're viewed as like very simple, mundane, you know, things that we should ought to be doing, we almost put this pressure on ourselves that we naturally find those things hard because they're boring or, like you said earlier, they're not interesting. We've got a lot of hobbies, but actually, no, they're really hard. And even people without ADHD, a lot of people find those stuff boring and hard.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think there is a whole piece about tackling the stuff that feels hard, because the other side of the coin is that if we just allow ourselves to go only with what we ever want to do, then we could quite easily get buried in laundry, couldn't we? So it's like there's some kind of compromise, and I guess that's the point that people often reach out to get a professional organizer, because they're like, I know that this is not serving me. So it's like, sure, I'm living in this mess around me, and you know, some of that is to do with ADHD, but actually I know that I'll feel a lot happier when this is dealt with. So, you know, if somebody's completely happy with their environment and it's a mess to other people, who cares? You know, that's my view. It's like, I don't judge people for how their home is, you know, even whatever it's like, whether it's super tidy or in fact, actually, that's not true. I would probably judge people more for being super tidy than for being super messy, because I'd be like, live a little, let it go. But I think it's that kind of thing of, it's our own choice. If it's bugging us, then that's the trigger to actually do something about it.
Yeah, if it's impacting us, not impacting what other people. Because I know when I used to have a bedroom when I was younger, my mum and dad would come in and be like, oh my God, you got so much stuff. And people always say to you, you've got so much stuff. And like my mum used to say, but it's not messy, it's just so much. And people come into my house now, and I have a lot of stuff on my walls. Like, I don't think there's any wall that's not empty. And people come and they're like, wow, like it's quite a lot. And I used to think, oh my God, I need to like minimize it. Maybe have my living room like minimalist. But then that doesn't represent me. And when you know me, you know that I like a lot of stuff because I need that to keep me interested and all that. But if I had that shame part, I wouldn't be having the environment that I need and want.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's so important. It's like, you know, one of my colleagues has done a master's in positive psychology and coaching.
Yeah.
And as part of her master's, she did a research paper about the impact of clutter on our well-being. And what was really interesting was that there was a direct correlation, very clear correlation between people who had a sense of their home being an extension of them.
Yeah.
So in other words, you're kind of really aligned. It's called psychological home.
Mm.
It feels like your home is a natural extension of who you are and how you think and so on, which is, I think, a wonderful concept, but also shows how important this is. It's not a trivial thing.
Yeah.
You know, when we're not aligned, when we don't have that kind of sense of psychological home, when that's not strong, then we feel disconnected, and the clutter does start to impact us, and and that's the time to tackle it. And sometimes our culture sort of says that's trivial.
Yeah.
That's kind of housewifey kind of thing.
Yeah.
And if it's affecting you, then it's not trivial. It needs to be tackled, and it's just finding a way of doing that without the shame, without bringing shame in as the stick to beat you with.
Yeah. More of it's just not aligned with you, and that there's something wrong. It's almost like when the actual clutter starts becoming mental clutter is when it needs to be organized, or it needs to be put in a system or a process that works for you.
Yeah. And it's interesting you mentioned mental clutter, because we're both coaches as well.
Yeah.
And how many of our clients are overwhelmed, and they're overwhelmed because they've got all of this stuff going on inside their head, and it's not organized. It's not downloaded. It's not there's no structure to it, and then it feels completely overwhelming, and we can't get started, and we get caught up in the emotions again. And I think it's not different. It's all the same, whether it's in our head or in our home. The physical and the mental, the challenges are the same.
Yeah, because I know a few of my clients, like when they're I work with obviously teenagers, and like during exams their rooms get messier.
Yeah.
And then I one of them says, I'm sorry, it really on my room. And I said, you're doing your GCSEs? Like, what? And then she was like, oh, right. That's why it's a bit messier, isn't it? And I said, you tell me. She goes, well, yeah, I'm really overwhelmed. Like, I've not had the time to focus in on it. And I was like, yeah. She goes, oh, so it doesn't mean that I'm messy. And I said, no, like what? And then she goes, oh, it's me that thinking that I'm messy because it looks. And I said, yeah, it's all this thing of this emotional shame trigger that just stop us from living our lives and stop us from creatively thinking, oh, I want to have this out, or I want to tidy this up, but let me try it a different way.
Yeah. And as you were saying that, it reminded me of one of my sons he's living at home with us at the moment, and he's in his mid-20s. He's got ADHD. When he was young, he was really messy, really, really messy. Both of them were. And what I noticed was that when he moved out, he did the whole messy student thing. And then he moved into another house. And what's happened over the years is his reset time has got shorter. So that kind of idea that if we're not naturally tidy people, as many of us aren't, let's face it, what happens is we let it get to a certain point, and then we're like, no, that's got too much now, I'm going to reset. And for him, when he was very young, he never used to reset unless we said, right, you've got to tidy your room. As he's got older, his tolerance for mess has got less. So now he'll probably leave it about, I don't know, a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks. And sometimes I'll go into his room and say, oh, have you had a fox in here or something? Because everything's like tossed around. But I say it in a light-hearted way, because he knows that I'm not judging him in any way for it. And then after a few days, he'll clear it all up, and his room will be really tidy. And then it will gradually slip again, and then it will get really tidy again. And what I've seen is the time's getting shorter. So he's recognizing the impact, how much he likes it when it's tidy, I guess, which is a great motivation for doing it, isn't it? It's a positive motivation.
That's it. It's a positive rather than, oh, I need to clean my room this week because mum said something, or I need to do it because my friends, like I know a lot of people that they invite friends for dinner as like a trigger to help them to clean, but it's not like but they've used it it's not that I need to clean it because they're going to say all these things. It's, oh, I've got friends coming, so I want it to be clean, so I'm going to have a purpose. It's almost just creating those triggers, those positive things that can get you to do these things that work for your way. Like that wouldn't work for me, like your son, like doing it every time, every week and a half. I have to keep on it every day, so it's not such a big task. But that's what works for me, and that's the unique thing about our brains.
Exactly. No, he would much prefer to hyper focus on it, if you like, than to do the boring everyday little, stuff that you have to do. I'm probably somewhere in between him and you. I'm still not a naturally tidy person, even though I'm an organizer, and but I am sort of tidier than him. So without any judgment, I'm saying that.
It's about finding your way of doing it in your medium, and I suppose having a professional organizer helps you to not have to do, because that's a big task if you're in that overwhelming shame, to then get to the point where you're finding systems that are working for you. Because I don't know what you usually find, but with any client, is they're trying to push themselves to do things that are not right for them.
Absolutely. And it's like the very first step is to, recognize that you're not going to suddenly become tidy overnight. I'm still not tidy after decades of doing this. It's just not the way my brain works, but it's working. I think it's that concentration on the process as well, rather than the results. So the results are kind of binary. You've either succeeded in having an immaculate home or you failed. Whereas I would say, let's concentrate on the habit of putting stuff away or keeping on top of your laundry or whatever, rather than the it's got to be perfect, because perfectionism is that's a crippling thing as well. And that shows up even for the so-called messy ADHDers among us. Quite often we're like, well, if I haven't got time to tidy it up perfectly, there's no point in me even starting. That's another form of perfectionism, isn't it? Right there. That people don't always recognize. They're like, oh no, I'm not perfectionist at all, you should see the state of my room. And I'm like, interesting. When we start digging a bit deeper,
it is. It's a very complicated mess, right?
Mess.
But it is just about finding what works and then keeping on top of that. And if you don't, it's okay. If you're ill and then just finding that system. I had a client that once, they said, I used to look at my house as a way of what looks nice. And then she says now she looks at it as, how does it need to flow? So, she's got like by the front door, she's got snacks, and like people are like, what? But she's like, yeah, but my kids know, because if they go out, they're neurodivergent, and they go out, they'll forget to eat. So they've got snacks right by the front door. So she goes in, they pick a snack, they walk out. So they've always.
Oh, I love that.
And it's just, or they've got a hook, and one hook, and all the messy stuff goes on this one hook or in this one box. And that works because it flows. It's a process.
And it's all about making it as easy as possible as well for us, because even a lid on the laundry basket can be an obstacle to us putting the laundry in the laundry basket rather than tossing it on the floor. So a lot of the work that I do with professional organizing, with my professional organizing clients, is right, let's see how simple we can make this. What can we do that will make it possible for you to, I don't know, make a cup of tea more easily. I mean, it's as a professional organizer, we often talk about zoning. So we talk about zoning is basically that idea of the toothbrush and toothpaste always being by the sink, because that's the obvious and practical and sensible place to keep it. But we don't always apply that to other places in the house. And I always say in the kitchen, start off with the hot drinks, because most people are having hot drinks several times during the day. So what are you doing several times? Let's make that work really well, make that really easy for you. Same with the laundry. That's a process that you need to be on top of. Otherwise, it creates mess everywhere. So, what can we do to make that as easy as possible? Lids off the laundry basket, sometimes the doors off the wardrobe, whatever it takes to make it easy. With children, tubs of toys instead of a box with a lid on that you've got to clip down.
Easy. I like that. Easy flow rather than easy to look at or what we expect from the world.
And quite often you can get a compromise between the two, so it doesn't, it can look nice as well. It's just finding something that looks nice and works, but first of all works well. and then fits with whatever your aesthetic is. So
wow. Wow, this is really surprised me for a Wednesday. Really deep, so much deeper than I ever would have thought and expected, but that's what I love about doing a podcast. So any last words or thoughts to kind of sum up our conversation for you, Sarah?
I think it's just coming back to that, getting curious about yourself without the judgment. To me, that is the starting point for all of this stuff. Is as long as we're beating ourselves up and being unkind, as long as there's that emotional content to the whole thing, as long as we're telling ourselves nasty things that we would never say to our friends, it's going to be hard to make changes. But once we start to get curious about what's going on, then you can start finding solutions and find a way forwards. And, it doesn't have to be a professional organizer. You might have a really lovely friend who can help you as well. The whole body doubling thing can be really powerful too, so long as they're not judgmental. So that's the key thing.
Yeah, someone to just help you when, in that time of need that is there to really compassionate and listen and help.
Yeah, without judgment. That's the key thing. Yeah.
So where can people find you?
They can find me. I'm slightly reluctant to tell you actually, because I'm currently living in Norway, so I'm not doing any in-home. I'm doing very little in-home work. But they can find me on my website, which is freeyourspace.co.uk, and get in touch with me. And if they want to find an organiser near them, they can go onto the APDO website, which is APDO. And put in on the specialism filter, just put in ADHD, and you will find organisers who've got a particular interest in working with people with ADHD. So there's someone for everyone. So
no, that's amazing, thank you. And I'll put all the links below, so because there's nothing worse than when you're listening to something and you're trying to get over it. So, absolutely great. And I'm taking away, I always like to share, kind of taking away that with clutter, there is a lot more to it. And that if your house is, and you're not happy with it, and if you look around now and you're just thinking, then that may be a sign for inside, which means it might be a time to not change, but a time to reach out for help, because it can be very overwhelming, all this stuff. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Sarah. I really appreciate all you coming on and just opening a conversation with me.
Oh, well, thank you for inviting me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
No, thank you. And from Norway. We'll leave another great episode with so much to relate to, so much to learn from. And myself, I learn from people every day. And if you're interested in coming on as a guest, have questions, or like some advice, anything, please reach out through our social media avenues. Come learn, listen, and experience the world through not my eyes, but our eyes. Why not? Have a great week. Declutter, but in a way that's not always with stuff. And we're out.
Dear Diary, as Indigo Hub's process goes on, it makes me stop and wonder, could there be more for us? More light, more experience, and more ways to see the world through our own eyes. I think this journey will be the